Almost a year on from the start of the war in Ukraine, Kyiv's Western allies have pledged state-of-the-art tanks for the first time. From the German-engineered excellence of the Leopard 2 tanks to the British Challenger 2, complete with, what else, a kettle for making tea, these new war machines will replace the Soviet-era vehicles Ukraine has been using to hold off the Russian advance. But with fears of a Russian spring offensive looming large on the horizon, and the Kremlin insisting that the donated tanks will burn just like all the others, Ukraine's allies face a race against time to get the tanks to the front lines. Cahal, who is sending these tanks and how many is Ukraine going to receive?
The tanks are coming principally from three countries in the first instance. We have Germany, the United States, and Britain. The precise numbers that will end up there, well, that's a matter for debate. I mean, the Ukrainians are talking about having pledges for more than 300, but it's unclear exactly where those are coming from and who is supplying them. For what we know so far, we have 14 coming from Germany, the same number coming from the UK, and 31 from America. Big name here is Germany, because the particular type of tank that the Germans are able to provide, it's called the Leopard 2, is a big export success for the Germans. It's very well regarded and has been sold to a lot of countries, in particular countries in Europe. And the key point here is that the Germans have to give permission, if you like, for any other country to hand over their Leopard tanks to Ukraine. And this is now what's happened. They've not only said that they are going to deliver a number of their own tanks, but also it will allow other countries, and Poland is probably the first in the queue, Spain, Norway, the Dutch as well, to give their tanks to the Ukrainians.
Serina, let's talk a bit more about the skills of these tanks. What can these tanks offer and what is the difference between them?
Let's start with the Leopard 2. The German army says it's characterised by its lethality, mobility and protection, and enhances the striking power of the armoured forces. Came into service in 1979 and has a maximum speed of about 43 miles per hour. On to the Challenger 2, which is the British Army's main battle tank. What our big boast is that it has never experienced a loss at the hands of the enemy. And that's partly down to this world-class armour, which is called Chobham armour or Dorchester armour, I believe. The British Army admits that it's slower than some of its rivals from other countries, but they say its accuracy more than makes up for that. And then you've got the Abrams, which has kind of been described to me as this kind of great all-rounder, which is from the US. But it has its own problems in that it requires a lot more fuel. There's a bit of uncertainty over how it will go on certain terrains as well.
And Serina, one of the defining characteristics of the Challenger 2 is having a kettle, which is perhaps the most British addition to a war machine that's ever come about.
Well, quite. I mean, I think it just kind of highlights that wherever you are in the world, all you really want is a cup of tea, even if you're being shot at. So it's not quite a kettle. It looks more like a kind of small little tank of its own. It's called a boiling vessel, BV, to those who use it. And it's obviously not just for tea. You know, you can heat up food and on-the-go meals rather than having to kind of essentially park up the tank and leave. You can kind of do it on the go.
These tanks aren't by themselves going to somehow change the course of the war. They're a very useful addition to what is available to Ukraine. But, you know, we shouldn't be sort of bigging them up as some sort of ultimate weapon. That said, they do have the potential to be extremely useful because they have the sort of technology that we're led to believe is considerably more advanced than that available to the Russian forces, and indeed available to Ukrainian tanks who are using very similar Russian or Soviet tanks at the moment. There is no doubt that the provision of these tanks is an escalation in the type of help that the West is willing to provide Ukraine, But at the same time, we can still see that reticence, or sort of degree of caution. We've already heard from both Washington and Germany this week that they're not going to countenance supplying fighter jets to Ukraine. For now, at least, they seem to be drawing the line on the ground weaponry that will hopefully lend further advantage to the Ukrainians.